When we hear the word revolution, we tend to think of one big explosive event. But what if the most important part isn't the fight itself, but what happens after? Today, we're digging into a really powerful essay by the political thinker Hannah Arendt. She took on one of history's most tragic puzzles. What does revolution truly mean?
And this gets us right to the heart of the problem. Revolutions almost always start with this incredible promise of freedom. But if you look at history, it tells a much darker, often brutal story. So why do so many of these movements, which start with the best intentions, end up collapsing into tyranny and terror?
Well, Hannah Arendt believed the answer to that huge question could be found by looking closely at two massive events that basically shaped the modern world: the American and the French Revolutions.
Okay, so let's start by unpacking this puzzle. What was the original idea, behind the word revolution in the first place?
The French philosopher Condorcet, he really nailed the original spirit of it. For him, and for those early revolutionaries, the word meant something very, very specific. A true revolution wasn't just any old uprising. No, its one and only goal had to be freedom.
But here's the paradox, the thing that really fascinated Arendt. Despite that noble goal, the historical track record is just awful. More often than not, the road that starts with a cry for freedom ends in the silence of total despotism. And that is the puzzle she set out to solve.
So, how did she tackle this? Well, she did something pretty brilliant. She put two revolutions with two totally different endings side by side to figure out what made one work, where the other one went so terribly wrong.
And the contrast is just night and day. Arendt calls the American Revolution a triumphant success, but oddly enough, it kind of stayed a local affair in terms of its global impact. The French Revolution, on the other hand, a complete disaster that devolved into terror, but it became this huge turning point in world history, its tragic pattern repeated over and over again. So what on earth was the difference?
For Arendt, a huge piece of the answer is actually what was happening before the fighting even started. Long before 1776, American colonists were already practicing politics. They were in their town halls, their local assemblies, debating and making decisions about public life. They already had a taste of what public freedom felt like. And this brings us to the absolute core of Arendt's entire argument. It's a distinction that unlocks everything: the difference between liberation and freedom. They sound similar, but they are worlds apart. So first up, you've got liberation. The easy way to think about this is freedom from. It's about breaking the chains, getting the boot off your neck, overthrowing the tyrant. It's about removing all the stuff that holds you down. And Arendt says this is absolutely crucial, but it's only the first step. It's not the main goal. This is the main goal: freedom. For Arendt, real freedom is a positive thing. It's freedom to. It's the freedom to actually show up in the public square with your fellow citizens and have a real say in how things are run. It's the active, day-in, day-out participation in a republic. And here it is, the key insight from Arendt herself. Just because you get liberated doesn't mean you'll automatically get freedom. It's totally possible to break the chains of a king only to find yourself shackled by some new kind of tyranny. That journey from just being liberated to actually being free, that is the hardest part of any revolution. So what stopped the French Revolution from making that leap? Arendt points to one single overwhelming force: the problem of poverty. This quote from the young revolutionary Saint Just, it just perfectly captures this massive shift. He said, "The wretched are the power of the earth." And suddenly, the revolution was face to face with this immense, uncontrollable force of nature, the raw, desperate power of millions of starving people. And that right there, for Arendt, was the game changer. The American Revolution was lucky, in the way. It didn't really have to deal with what she called the social question on this kind of massive scale. But in France, the revolution dragged le peuple, the masses of the poor and suffering, out of the darkness and onto the political stage for the very first time. And what happened next was this tragic chain reaction. See, the revolution started with the goal of political freedom, but then it slammed head-on into the reality of mass suffering, and so the goal shifted. It wasn't about freedom anymore. It was about ending misery, about achieving public happiness. But, Arendt argues, you can't solve a deep social problem like poverty with political tools. So they turned to violence. Terror became the instrument to force a solution. And in that fire, the original goal, political freedom, was burned to the ground.
And if you want to know just how much the goalposts moved, just listen to what Robespierre said. The Republic, the monarchy, I know only the social question. Faced with that level of overwhelming human need, all the debates about what kind of government to have suddenly seemed totally pointless. The only thing that mattered anymore was survival.
So, wow, that's a pretty bleak picture, right? But where does Arendt leave us? Well, she actually ends with this really profound and, believe it or not, hopeful idea of what true freedom is all about.
She says the real treasure of a revolution, the thing we should never forget, isn't just knocking down the old system. It's that incredible, shared human experience of starting something brand new. It's the feeling behind that Latin phrase you see on every US dollar bill, a new order of the ages. It's the freedom to be a founder, to begin again. And let's be clear, Arendt wasn't some wide-eyed idealist. She knew how hard this was. She even quotes Machiavelli, who she called the father of revolutions, just to remind us how incredibly risky and dangerous it is to try and bring something truly new into the world. So when you boil it all down, that's Arendt's big idea. Freedom isn't a thing you get and then just have, like a piece of property. No, it's an activity. It's the ongoing, collective, and, yeah, sometimes dangerous power to create a new beginning together. And that really leaves us with a question for our own time. Is that kind of freedom, the freedom to be a founder, something we're still actually fighting for today?